The afternoon sun hung like a burning coin above the plains, spilling heat over the dry earth where Clara Hensley moved slowly through her chores. She wore the same faded calico dress she had mended 100 times, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, her face pale beneath the weight of grief that never left her. The little ranch she clung to was no more than a cabin of weather-worn timber, a crooked fence, and a stretch of brittle grass that barely kept her mule alive. Each creak of the old windmill's blades cut against the silence, turning with a tired groan that seemed to echo her own spirit. The trails beyond her land lay empty, dusty veins of earth leading toward a town that whispered about her but never helped. She had buried her husband on that very land, and beside him a boy not yet 10, both taken by violence years ago. Loneliness had become her only companion, steady and sharp as the desert wind. A crow passed overhead, its cry splitting the stillness. Clara lifted her head from the water bucket and scanned the horizon. Dust moved in the distance, too much to be cattle, too swift to be the harmless wind. Her pulse quickened, though she forced her hands to remain steady as she dipped water into the trough. The silence of the plains seemed to close in tighter, pressing against her ears. She knew the shape of that dust, the way it lifted in ragged plumes. Riders. 5 of them broke from the haze, their horses lathered and dark with sweat. They came fast, kicking up the dry soil, their laughter carrying before them like a warning. Clara felt her stomach twist as she straightened, her hands trembling against the rim of the bucket. She had seen these men before on the edge of town, the Whitlock marauders, known for gambling, stealing, and worse. Men with no law above them, only hunger and cruelty. She had prayed they'd never trouble themselves with her little ranch, that her obscurity might protect her. But prayers in the desert often vanished like water poured on sand. They reined up before her gate, their horses stamping and snorting. The leader, a narrow-eyed man with a scar running from temple to jaw, tipped his hat with mock courtesy. "Afternoon, widow," he drawled, voice oily with malice. "Fine little place you've got here. Shame it looks too small for just one soul." Clara's throat went dry, but she stood still, arms crossed to hide the quiver in her hands. "What do you want?" The man's smile widened, showing yellowed teeth. His companions chuckled, circling their horses like wolves. One spat into the dirt, another toyed with the handle of his whip, snapping it against his thigh with a crack that made her flinch. "We heard tell," the leader went on, "that your husband had a stash of rifles. Some say he tucked away silver, too. Seems unfair to keep it buried when good men like us are riding light." "There's nothing here," she said quickly, though her voice wavered. "You've heard wrong." "Wrong." The whip cracked again, and one of them swung down from his saddle. He moved close, eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of her fear. "We don't get wrong, missus. We take what's owed." Her chest heaved. She wanted to run inside, to grab the old rifle above the hearth, but her legs felt nailed to the ground. The men dismounted one by one, surrounding her in a loose circle, dust rising from their boots. The leader leaned in close enough for her to smell whiskey on his breath. "Best not lie to us, Clara. We'll search the place, tear it apart if we need. But first," his eyes flicked to the men with the whip, "teach her not to hold back." The lash uncoiled with a hiss, and before she could move, fire seared across her back. The first strike stole her breath, the second forced a cry from her lips. She stumbled, clutching at the fence, but the whip fell again, cruel and sharp, tearing through cloth and skin. The marauders laughed, a hollow chorus of mockery that mingled with the windmill's groan. Her knees buckled, but she would not fall. Every lash carved pain into her body, yet deeper still it carved something harder, an iron vow. She thought of her boy, his laughter cut short by fever, of her husband, cut down on the trail by men not unlike these. Each strike carried the memory of loss, and with it grew a silent promise that she would not be broken. Her voice did not plead. Her eyes, though blurred with tears, burned with a fury they did not see. At last the whip snapped back, its wielder grinning at the red marks it had left. Clara stood swaying, breath ragged, dress torn and clinging. Her skin stung with every movement, but she would not give them the satisfaction of collapse. The leader chuckled low. "Stubborn little thing, aren't you? Maybe we'll come back tomorrow, see if that pride still holds." They mounted up, their laughter spilling into the hot air as they turned their horses toward the horizon. Dust swallowed them again, leaving Clara trembling by the trough, her body on fire, her spirit trembling but not extinguished. She sank to her knees in the dirt, pressing her hands against the ground, drawing strength from the land that had taken everything yet still gave her shelter. The silence returned, heavy as a stone. But she was not alone. High on the ridge that overlooked her ranch, a figure sat astride a dark horse, motionless as shadow carved into the earth. The rider's hat brim cut his face from sight, his posture straight, silent, watchful. He had not moved during the marauder's cruelty. Not a word, not a sound. Only now, as the widow knelt in dust and blood, did he shift, the faint glint of sunlight catching the steel of a revolver at his hip. No one in Dry Creek knew his name. To Clara, in that moment, he was nothing more than a silhouette against the dying sun. Yet the air itself seemed to tighten around his presence, as if the desert held its breath. The marauders had left their mark on her flesh, but they had also drawn the gaze of something far more dangerous. The rider did not ride down. He only watched, still as stone, while the wind carried away the last echoes of cruel laughter. Clara, unaware of the eyes upon her, pressed her bloodied hands to the earth and whispered through clenched teeth, "You will not have me. Not my land. Not my soul." From the ridge, the silent rider turned his horse slowly, the animal's hooves whispering against rock. He disappeared into the haze of dusk, leaving only the faint shimmer of dust in his wake. But the vow he carried burned as fierce as hers, though he spoke it only to himself, voiceless as the desert night. The marauders would pay, not in silver, not in pride, but in lead. Clara woke to the slow ache of torn flesh and splintered pride. Morning light spilled through the cracked shutters, soft and gold, like it had no memory of what happened the day before. Her back throbbed where the whip had kissed her skin, and every movement came with the sting of fire. She lay still for a while, listening. No hoofs, no laughter, no jeers, just wind brushing against the walls and the soft creak of the old cabin settling with the day. Her throat was dry. The bucket by the door was nearly empty, and her mule hadn't been watered. She rose with effort, each step a silent cry inside her bones. Blood had dried on her dress, stiff and sticky, and when she peeled the fabric away from her back, she had to bite her lip not to scream. She tore one of her husband's old shirts, soaked the cloth in what water was left, and cleaned the wounds best she could. Her hands were steady, though her face was pale. She didn't cry. The mirror above the basin showed a woman she barely recognized. Hollow-eyed, lips split, but behind the bruises lived something harder than fear. Clara Hensley was still here, still breathing, and that meant something. Later, she stood on the porch, wrapped in her husband's duster, watching the land she had once dreamed would grow green with time. It hadn't. The drought never left, and the crops were long dead, but this land was hers. She had buried her boy beneath the cottonwood tree, and her husband beside him. That earth held their names in it. She would not give it up, not to scum who rode in with dust and whipcord and thought a woman alone could be scared from what was hers. She didn't go to town for help. She knew better. Word had already spread, faster than wildfire in canyon brush. By the time she limped into Dry Creek's mercantile 2 days later, the whispers had arrived ahead of her. "Shame what they done to her," muttered the barber behind his mustache. "She should have just handed over what they wanted," someone else hissed near the post office. "No sense fighting devils like them." Mrs. Lyle at the general store gave her a tin of salve for the wounds but didn't ask if she needed a ride home. Even the sheriff kept his eyes low when she passed him. He hadn't drawn a gun in years, and his spine had more starch in his badge than his bones. The town watched her from behind windows and half-closed doors. Watched but did not move. She was alone. Again. Back at the ranch, she hammered boards over the broken gate, tied knots with shaking hands, fed the mule, and tended to her wounds in silence. Days passed. The sky stayed dry and the wind hot. But Clara stood upright now. She carried her husband's rifle across her shoulder, the weight of it more comfort than burden. The bruises faded slowly, but not the fire. One afternoon, as sun dipped behind the buttes, she saw dust curling again on the horizon. This time, her hands didn't tremble. She stood at the edge of her porch, shotgun in one hand, the other clenched at her side. The gang rode slower now, no longer laughing. The leader, Scarface, stared at her with narrowed eyes. He didn't dismount. "Still here, huh?" he sneered. "Thought we made ourselves clear." She didn't reply. He pointed toward the land. "We're claiming this now. Ain't enough law to stop us, and you sure as hell can't." Silence. Her gaze didn't waver. The man leaned back in his saddle, nodding as if she'd confirmed something for him. "Suit yourself," he said. "You got one more sunrise to pack up, After that, we burn it down." They turned and left. She stood in the dust long after they vanished. Not from fear, but from memory. The cabin that night was still and dark. The air thick with silence, broken only by the creak of rafters and the distant yowl of coyotes. Clara sat by the fire with a pot of weak coffee, the rifle propped beside her. Her body ached, but her mind would not rest. She thought of the last night her husband rode out, how he never returned, and how their boy had run fever the same week, too fast for any remedy. The land had taken them both, yet asked her to keep going. Outside, the wind shifted. The mule stomped nervously in the pen. Clara moved to the window, heart kicking up a beat. The moonlight spilled across the yard in pale silver, and in it, a shadow moved. Not a man, not a beast, just a shape, broad, still, and watching. She froze, breath caught in her throat. Was it one of the marauders? Had they come early to finish what they started? She inched toward the rifle, eyes fixed on the dark figure beyond the fence. The shadow didn't move, just stood. The seconds stretched. A minute passed. Then another. Then, slowly, the figure turned. The glint of metal at the hip caught a sliver of moonlight. A horse stepped into view, silent as fog, hooves barely stirring dust. And just like that, the shadow melted back into the trees. Clara stood for a long time in the quiet, one hand on the window frame, the other clutching the rifle. Her heart was loud in her ears, but she wasn't afraid. Not exactly. Somewhere out there, someone was watching. And she didn't know if they came for her salvation, or to see the end. The black stallion moved like smoke across the canyon edge, its hooves muffled by dry earth and soft sand. On its back rode a man built from shadows and time, tall, shoulders broad beneath a weather-beaten duster, face hidden beneath the brim of a sweat-darkened hat. His skin bore the story of too many suns, and his eyes, when they flickered into view, held the color of distant storms. A faded scar ran from his jaw to just beneath his left eye, a line that time had etched but never erased. He never spoke, not to strangers, not even to those who dared ask. He arrived in towns like a rumor, and vanished the same way. The folks in Dry Creek called him the Ghost Rider. But a woman with calloused hands and a bloodstained dress would, in time, know him as Jonas Creed. It was on a windless morning that Clara found the first sign of him, a sack of supplies set quietly by her door. Cornmeal, jerky, coffee, a small wrap parcel of clean bandages. No note. No tracks. Just the faint scent of horse and leather. She stepped outside in bare feet, blinking at the sun, and stared toward the edge of her property. The windmill turned once, slowly, as if nodding in warning. He came again 3 days later, the same way. This time he left a tin of salve and a box of cartridges wrapped in oilcloth. She found them nestled beside the doorframe just after dawn. Her heart stirred, not from fear, but from the strange comfort of knowing someone was near. Someone who didn't ask questions. Someone who didn't treat her like a ghost. By the end of the week, Clara saw him. Just once. He sat astride the black horse near the ridge where the cottonwoods thinned, his silhouette framed against a bleeding sunset. He made no move to come down. No wave, no call. Just a silent watcher, like a hawk waiting out the storm. Clara stood on her porch a long while, watching back, the rifle resting in her arms. When she finally turned away, he was gone. The town began to whisper. "Creed's back," muttered the blacksmith, wiping soot from his brow. "Didn't think he'd come this far west again." "Always shows up before something bad," said the barber, voice low. "Man's cursed. Trouble walks beside him." At the saloon, cards slowed in hands and drinks paused at lips whenever his name floated through the haze. Some claimed he'd once been a bounty hunter. Others swore he'd killed a sheriff in Santa Fe, or that he'd lost his family to Comancheros and hadn't spoken a word since. No one really knew. But when the Ghost Rider came to Dry Creek, the air changed. Clara felt it too. She caught her reflection in the cracked mirror above the basin, faded bruises still painted across her cheek, lashes healed but raw. She wrapped her shawl tighter, stepped out into the golden hush of dusk, and walked beyond the fence line. Her body still moved with pain, but her eyes were steady. She found him near the mule's pen, checking the fence line as if it were his own. The black horse stood nearby, head bowed, reins loose. He turned as she approached, but said nothing. "You the one leaving the supplies?" Her voice was firm, low. The words fell heavy in the quiet. He nodded once, barely. "Why?" she asked. You don't know me. His eyes met hers, deep, gray, unreadable. He didn't answer. Something in the silence made her chest tighten. It wasn't coldness. It wasn't pity. It was weight. The kind men carry when they've lived through fire and chose to never speak of the burn. She stepped closer, chin lifted. I'm not some broken bird. You don't have to feel sorry. His jaw twitched, and for a heartbeat, she thought he might speak. But instead, he reached into his coat, pulled out a tin of rifle oil, and placed it on the post beside her. Then he turned, mounted the stallion, and rode away, leaving only hoofprints in the dust and a silence that echoed louder than words. That night in town, the saloon swelled with laughter and sweat. The Whitlock gang lounged in the corner booth, cards fanned between whiskey bottles and half-empty glasses. Scarface leaned back in his chair, legs crossed, voice carrying just loud enough for the room to hear. Widow's got grit, I'll give her that, he snorted. Didn't squeal near as much as I figured. Laughter erupted around the table. One of them mimicked her cry with a theatrical yelp. Another smacked his drink against the wooden rhythm, as if mocking the lash. A barmaid dropped her tray. No one picked it up. Next time, Scarface grinned, we take the whole damn place. Fence, mule, land, and maybe we show her what a real man's brand feels like. Cards slapped the table. Bottles clinked. The stink of cowardice was thick in the room, but no one spoke against them. No one, except the shadow outside. Jonas Creed stood across the street, leaning against the frame of the old livery stable. His duster flapped in the low breeze. A half-chewed cigar glowed at the corner of his mouth. He didn't blink. Didn't move. He just listened. When the moon rose above the rooflines, Clara saw him again. This time not in passing. This time not from a distance. He sat outside her cabin, legs stretched before him, hunched over an old Colt revolver spread open in his lap. The gun was worn, blued metal rubbed smooth by years of draw and fire. Beside him, a strip of oiled cloth lay flat, lined with bullets and tools arranged like a surgeon's tray. He cleaned each piece slowly, methodically, as though the ritual steadied his bones. The click of metal sounded like thunder in the quiet night. Clara watched from the window, her breath shallow. Jonas Creed wasn't just waiting. He was preparing. The night broke apart with fire. Clara smelled the smoke before she saw the glow, thin at first, seeping through the cracks in the shutters like devil's breath. Then came the sound, hooves, laughter, a bottle smashing against stone. She rose from her cot, heart thudding hard, and pulled a rifle from above the hearth. Her hand trembled, not from fear, but from knowing what she had to do. Outside, orange light flickered against the wood grain of the porch. The barn was already aflame, crackling as dry hay caught and roared into the sky. Shadows moved just beyond the fence, 5 riders again, maybe 6, and one with a burning torch at his hand. She stepped out into the heat, wind tangling her hair around her face. The rifle fell heavy in her grip, heavier than it had ever felt in her husband's hands. She leveled it at the torchbearer, her voice raw. Drop it. The laughter stopped. The scar-faced leader stepped forward, reins loose, hat tipped back. His eyes were wild in the firelight, teeth shining like a coyote's. He grinned at her, mockery curling at the edge of his voice. You gonna shoot, widow? The men with the torch chuckled and tossed it high. It arced toward the roof of her cabin, everything she had left in this world. Clara's scream caught in her throat, but she didn't hesitate. Her finger pulled the trigger. The shot cracked like a whip. The torch-bearer dropped, the flame snuffed as it hit the dirt beside him. The rest scattered momentarily, surprised, then turned back, guns drawn, fury twisting their faces. Clara ducked behind the water trough as bullets tore into the cabin's walls, splinters raining around her like hail. She rolled, clutching the rifle, chambered another round with shaking fingers. Her shoulder throbbed where the butt had bruised her, but she didn't flinch. She was outnumbered, surrounded, but she wouldn't die hiding. She rose again, rifle up, and stopped. The night had changed. No more laughing. No more shouting. Only wind, fire crackling in the distance, and the sound of silence being split by a shot that wasn't hers. One marauder jerked violently in his saddle and tumbled to the ground with a sickening thud. Another barely turned before a second bullet punched through his chest, sending him backwards into the dust. Gunfire echoed again, sharper, faster, 3 rounds in perfect rhythm. Clara dropped to a crouch, heart hammering, eyes searching the darkness. From the edge of the trees, he stepped out. Jonas Creed, draped in shadow, revolver still smoking, boots silent on the earth. His duster flared with each stride, his face a mask of stone. There was no urgency in his walk. No panic. Just a cold, deliberate calm, as though he'd done this 100 times in 100 forgotten towns. He moved like he didn't need to aim. Like he already knew where everyone would be before they shifted. One of the remaining riders turned and fled, spearing his horse hard, shouting to the others, "He's here. It's him." 2 more followed, cursing, boots kicking up dust and sparks as they vanished into the desert, leaving only the dead behind. Clara stood slowly, the rifle hanging limp in her hands. Her chest rose and fell with ragged breath, her eyes wide, not with fear now, but with awe. Jonah stopped beside the body of the man who'd held the torch. He knelt, picked up the scorched cloth, and tossed it into the watering trough. Then he holstered his revolver with a slow, practiced motion. She stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. "You." He turned to face her. In the firelight, his features looked carved from stone, hard, aged, but not cruel. A long silence stretched between them, filled with nothing but the popping of timber and the distant whinny of frightened horses. "What are you?" she asked, not as accusation, but as a breath of truth. His eyes met hers, gray as dusk. "I was a lawman once," he said at last, voice like dry leather. "Before the law turned hollow." That was all. Then he walked past her, into the darkness, toward the ridge. Clara stood in the yard, smoke curling around her, watching him go. The cabin still stood. The barn was gone. The fence half-burned. But she was alive. Still whole. And the ones who had come to take everything were running now. Somewhere in the dark, the leader of the marauders spat blood and vowed vengeance. But even he knew what Clara now understood. Jonas Creed was not just a man. He was a reckoning. The moon rode high over the desert, casting the world in silver and shadow. Jonas Creed rode beneath it, a wraith of silence astride the black stallion, his duster flaring like wings of ash behind him. No words passed his lips. No sound escaped him but the quiet creak of saddle leather and the muffled rhythm of hooves against sand. He had become motion itself, relentless, measured, inevitable. The desert did not question his passing. The canyons, dry and ancient, opened their jaws and swallowed him whole. He rode through them like a storm with no wind, following the trail of dust and panic the fleeing marauders had left behind. He didn't need maps. He didn't need scouts. Men like them always ran the same way, toward places they believed no justice could follow. They were wrong. The first one fell beneath a blood-orange sky. He had stopped to the canyon's lip, panting, boots worn, horse foaming. He never heard the shot. Just one sharp crack that echoed through the gorge like a thunderclap. His body tumbled down the rocks, vanishing into the shadow below. Jonas didn't pause. He reloaded as he rode. By midnight, the second had veered west, seeking water. He found it, a shallow pool fed by a dying spring, its surface smooth as glass. He crouched, gulping greedily, dust thick in his mouth. The night around him was quiet. Too quiet. When he stood, water dripping from his beard, a bullet met him between the eyes. He crumpled backward into the pool, red ribbons spiraling into the reflection of the stars. Jonas passed without looking. The third tried to hide in the shell of an old silver mine. It sat sunken between 2 hills, its timbers sagging, the entrance like the mouth of some forgotten god. He crouched in the dark, clutching his pistol, listening to every breath, heart slamming in his chest. But Jonas didn't come from the front. He came from above, a shadow on the rocks, boots silent. The marauder never saw him until the muzzle flash lit the mine's walls with white light, and by then, it was far too late. Back at the ranch, Clara sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the black horizon. She hadn't slept in 2 nights, but her eyes were wide, clear, haunted. In her lap rested her husband's journal, a worn thing filled with ranch notes, supply lists, and once, love letters. But she couldn't read it now. All she saw was the shape of Jonas riding into the night like a ghost bound to no law but his own. She thought of the way he moved, the silence in him, the way his hands had cleaned that revolver with reverence, not violence. He wasn't just fighting. He was remembering. And suddenly she knew. Not from words, but from the weight in his eyes. Jonas Creed had once lost more than land. He had lost a woman, perhaps a child. Marauders had not just broken his world, they had rewritten it. Silence was his grief. Lead was his language. And somewhere in that reckoning, she felt protected. Not pitted. Not pitiful. Watched over. He wasn't just chasing them for her. He was chasing them for every widow who had buried a name in dry earth and lived with nothing but echoes. By dawn, the desert held only one of the original 5 marauders, the leader. Scar-faced and cunning, he'd ridden hard and fast, cutting through brush, doubling back, losing the trail. But even he knew the chase wasn't over. He could feel it, a chill beneath the sun. Jonas Creed wasn't chasing him with speed. He was chasing with certainty. The leader reached a ridge near Devil's Hollow, where rock formations twisted like blackened fingers and wind moaned through ancient stone. There, half-starved and wild-eyed, he found what he needed, a small gang of mercenaries camped in the ravine below, drifters, hired guns with more bullets than brains. He offered them gold, whiskey, land, whatever it took. They laughed when he told them who was coming. Laughed until he showed them the bodies. Then they loaded their rifles. The leader stood on the ridge as the sun bled across the horizon, painting the desert in crimson and copper. He grinned, though it barely touched his eyes. "You think you're a ghost, Creed," he muttered into the wind. "Let's see if ghosts bleed." Far behind him, beyond the twisting stones and echoing hollows, Jonas rode on. And the land waited. The wind was high that evening, kicking dust across the broken walls of the abandoned frontier fort. Weathered by time and long since deserted by any army, the place stood like a dying monument, walls crumbling, gates splintered, watchtower collapsed into twisted timber. Inside its hollowed heart, the marauder leader waited with 6 rifles and 3 hired killers, their faces rough and unfamiliar, drawn more by coin than cause. The leader paced slow along the battlement, spitting into the dirt, hand resting near his belt. His eyes never left the trail beyond the ridge, scanning the rocks, the horizon, the wind. He felt it in his bones, that he wasn't the hunter anymore. Far beyond the fort, Clara gripped the reins with one hand, her husband's rifle strapped to her back. Her side still burned from where the whip had split her skin days earlier, and every jolt of the saddle sent fire through her ribs. But she rode anyway. The mule was slow, clumsy on rocky climbs, but she wouldn't turn back. She'd seen too many men die alone. Up ahead, the desert stretched wide and red under the setting sun. The sky looked bruised, the clouds low and boiling. She pressed forward. At the ridge, Jonas Creed dismounted without a word. He let the black stallion walk free, silent and calm as its master. He stood alone at the entrance of the fort, revolver already drawn, the air around him dry and tight with something that felt like finality. Inside, someone saw him and hissed a warning. The mercenaries scattered to their positions, rifles pointed from slits in the wall. One man crouched near the gate, another high in the broken tower with a shotgun. The leader stood still, eyes narrowing. "I knew it'd be you," he muttered. Jonas said nothing. "Always figured you were dead," the men continued, stepping forward. "They said the law hanged you." Jonas didn't blink. Guess it didn't stick. Then the wind broke, and with it, silence. Gunfire exploded from the wall. Bullets ripped through air and timber, dust rising in clouds. Jonas moved like lightning, ducking behind a crumbled cart, returning fire in sharp, measured bursts. One mercenary fell before he could reload. Another screamed from the tower as a single shot punched through his throat. Smoke coiled between the broken bricks. Every sound echoed, boots scraping, the ping of shells, the sharp click of hammers pulled back. Jonas advanced, sidestepping across open ground with terrifying grace, each movement clean, each shot precise. 2 men tried flanking him, shouting as they came around the northern wall. He dropped one with a round to the chest, the other with a shot that struck between the eyes. Neither screamed. Blood stained the dust. Clara reached the ridge just as the last mercenary fell. She pulled the mule to a halt, heart pounding, watching from behind a rock. Jonas stood in the center of the yard now, smoke rising from the barrel of his Colt, coat flapping in the heated wind. The leader was alone. He stepped from behind a wagon, hand trembling as it hovered near his holster. "You ain't just a bounty hunter," he said, swallowing hard. "You're Jonas Creed. Hell, I knew you. Dodge Junction. You were a lawman. A damn good one." Jonas nodded once. The leader's face twisted. "They said you turned on your own. That you wouldn't look the other way." A slow breath escaped Jonas's lips. "They strung you up like a dog," the men whispered. "Said your wife was fair game." Said. The revolver barked. One shot. The marauder leader jerked back, hands grasping at his chest. He fell hard, mouth open, eyes wide with something that wasn't quite surprise. Just before the light left him, he whispered, "I didn't want it to be you." Jonah stood over him, silent, watching the dust settle. Clara walked slowly into the fort, the rifle still slung over her shoulder. She passed the bodies, smoke, and broken stone, her boots steering crimson soil. She stopped a few feet from him, her breath shaky. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. Jonas looked at her, his face unreadable beneath the wide brim of his hat. "Yes, I did," he finally said, voice low as thunder in the distance. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. Not for the dead men, not for the smoke or the stench of gunpowder, but for the silence in Jonas's eyes, the ache carved deeper than any wound. She reached out, hand brushing his arm. "Thank you." He didn't reply. He only turned, walking back to the black stallion, which waited at the edge of the yard. He mounted in one smooth motion and tipped his hat toward her, a gesture more sacred than any word. Then he rode into the desert. Not fast, not slow, just steady. Some say he vanished after that night, a shadow swallowed by sand and wind. Others claim he still watches from the ridges, showing up where justice fails and bullets speak louder than law. But in the town of Dry Creek, folks remember the night a widow bled, and how a rider made them pay and lead.